I think we're just past 3 o'clock, so we're going to start here so we can finish on time. Firstly, thank you so much for joining us today. Amazing to see new friends, old friends, colleagues, excellencies here, and industry peers. This is a part of our CSU flagship this year, where we try to bring UN and industry and academia together to discuss important topics. And this year's topic is designed for 7 generations in housing. We are proud to be here in the UN for this conversation in the ECOSOC chamber. And this event is only possible by some of our collaborators and sponsors today. So we would like to thank UN Habitat, Permanent Mission of the Republic of Singapore to the United Nations, AIA New York, Grimshaw, Perkins Eastman, and HKS, and some of them are here with us today. Thank you so much for joining us. And today we're going to explore how traditional knowledge and cutting-edge innovation can come together to create sustainable solutions to housing issues, problems, but also innovation that we can create. And we were going to talk about a little bit about what does it mean to design for 7 generations, not just today in mind, but also the future. But before we do that, I'm Yasemin Kologlu. I'm the president of CSU, Consortium for Sustainable Urbanization. I'm also here with amazing individuals that are going to give us our remarks today. And we're going to start with that without taking further time. So let's start. So first we have Andre Dzikus, Director of UN Habitat. Andre is the Director of UN Habitat's New York Liaison Office with more than 3.5 decades of leadership in sustainable urban development. Andres.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Yasemin. And first of all protocols observed, Excellencies, distinguished delegates, colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, it's a great pleasure to be here on behalf of UN Habitat to really open this flagship conference on adequate housing design for 7 generations. That takes us to the year 2200. Quite a projection. I also send some very cordial greetings from our Executive Director, Anna Claudia Rosbach, who would have loved to be here, so I'm presenting this on her behalf. And I'd also like to thank and congratulate the Consortium for Sustainable Urbanization, the American Institute of Architects, and also the co-organizers, the Permanent Mission of Singapore to the United Nations, for bringing us together. And looking at this very full room really shows the full resolve of everybody to contribute towards this very important agenda item. And also thanking all of you for your dedication to advancing sustainability of housing and a challenge that lies at the intersection of the most pressing global crisis of our time, the housing crisis and also the climate crisis. The global housing crisis, driven by factors such as rapid urbanization, the decline of public investment in adequate housing, and the financialization of housing markets, has led to the expansion of informal settlements and rising homelessness. Today, there are 2.8 billion people who lack access to adequate housing, and over 300 million experience homelessness. Already 1.1 billion people are living in informal settlements and in slums, and the number is expected to reach 3 billion people by the year 2050. This crisis unfolds within a broader climate emergency in which housing is both a driver and a victim. As a driver, the building and construction sector accounts for nearly 37% of global CO2 emissions, nearly half of which is linked to housing. As a victim, the sector faces escalating losses from extreme weather events. Between 2013 and 2023, disasters caused more than 220 million internal displacements, and up to 1.2 billion people could be at risk of climate-related displacement by 2050. The impacts of climate change on housing conditions are increasingly recognized with their profound effects on human health and well-being, from heat stress, respiratory and cardiovascular diseases linked to poor ventilation and indoor quality, to the mental and social strains caused by displacement, insecurity, and loss of home and community. The housing sector is also the largest consumer of land and natural resources, a major source of pollution and a driver of biodiversity loss. Construction accounts for roughly 50% of global material extraction and 12% of freshwater use, accelerating ecosystem degradation, depleting forests, soils, and water sources essential to life. Unplanned urban expansion drives biodiversity loss, increases flood and heat island risks, and erases the natural buffers that sustain both people and cities. The destruction of peri-urban ecosystems also undermines our ability to build circular economies, short supply chains, and local material systems, all vital for affordable and sustainable housing. In this context, we can draw deep, inspiration from knowledge and practices of indigenous and local communities, whose housing traditions often respect ecological balance and strengthen resilience. Their wisdom reminds us that designing for 7 generations means not only ensuring adequate housing for all, but safeguarding the foundation for life. If we go back 7 generations to 1750, we will see that a lot of the houses built at that time were built using local building materials, and they could also be fixed by the people themselves. The theme of sustainable housing is a major focus of UN Habitat's work at the global level. It'll feature as one of our central themes of the open-ended intergovernmental expert working group on adequate housing, which is exploring the recognition of environmental sustainability as the 8th pillar of adequate housing. It is also one of the core priorities of UN Habitat's newly established Canada office, which is building partnerships and knowledge on sustainable and affordable housing across different regions. For centuries, indigenous and local communities have lived in close harmony with their environments, developing housing systems rooted in ecological balance, solidarity, and adaptability. Their homes and settlements reflect a profound understanding of climate, geography, and social cohesion, integrating architecture, landscape, and community life into one living system. These very communities are among the first and the most exposed to the impacts of climate change today. Today, indigenous peoples are more likely to live in substandard dwellings, lacking cultural adequacy, to face homelessness, forced evictions, and land dispossession, to suffer adverse health outcomes linked to poor indoor air quality and building conditions, environmental degradation, and limited access to services. This must remind us that the right to adequate housing is inseparable from the right to land, culture, and participation, and that housing justice is both a social and environmental imperative. Yet, across continents, housing traditions of indigenous people and local communities, locally sourced and deeply attuned to ecosystems, offer powerful models for resilience, adaptation, and ecological transitions. They embody what sustainability truly means, building in the balance with the environment and with communities, using local, biosourced and renewable materials, and socially inclusive and labor-intensive building practices that regenerate ecosystems and strengthen social bonds and local economies. These practices represent the foundation of resilient and low-carbon housing. As the guardian of SDG 11, UN Habitat promotes the protection of sustainable traditional building practices and their inclusion in informal building codes, architectural and civil engineering curricula, and public investment schemes. Technical innovations from 3D printing to modular construction to AI-assisted urban planning, design, and digital fabrication offers new opportunities for efficiency, precision, and scale in housing production. Advances in industrialization, prefabrication, and data-driven planning have the potential to reduce construction time, minimize waste, and optimize energy performance. Cities, architects, community organizations, and policymakers are already developing effective and inclusive approaches that combine policy, financial or governance innovation with social innovation. These range from community-led upgrading and cooperative housing models to innovations in housing finance, insurance, and legislative reforms that enable incremental, climate-responsible, and affordable housing. Still, weak housing data systems limit institutional capacities, and poor integration of spatial and social economic data constrain the ability of governments to design, implement, and monitor evidence-based housing policies that adequately respond to populations' needs. In eThekwini in South Africa, for instance, where nearly a quarter of the population lives in informal settlements, outdated data has made it difficult to plan upgrading projects and deliver basic services efficiently. The use of BEAM, Building and Establishment Automated Mapper, an artificial intelligence tool developed by UNITAR in Hamburg, Germany, to map informal settlements, supported the city to rapidly identify and map building structures from aerial imagery and help city planners to identify growth patterns and better understand the dynamics of informal settlements, enabling municipalities to prioritize upgrading initiatives. Together, we must ensure that innovations reach the communities most in need through deliberate inclusion strategies, legal reforms, and inclusive public policy to bridge the housing divide. The challenge before us is therefore twofold: to harness the potential of technology and finance to deliver housing to scale and speed, while ensuring that these innovations remain accessible, inclusive, and locally grounded. I very much look forward to today's discussion, which will make an important contribution towards bringing scientific, traditional, and policy knowledge. Together, they can inform how we rethink housing systems to advance the realization of the right to adequate housing for all, empower communities, build resilience for generations to come, and preserve and restore the ecosystem. This resonates with the discussions and decisions made by the second session of the open-ended expert working group on adequate housing held recently in Nairobi, Kenya. Deliberations of this group will continue throughout the year leading up to the third session in November 2026. It also echoes the Doha Political Declaration adopted at the Second World Social Summit for Sustainable Development, which calls on actors to ensure that housing policies address the needs of the most vulnerable. These reflections will directly be fed into the World Urban Forum, which will be held in Baku in Azerbaijan in May 2026, as well as also the work of the Global Urban Data Coalition, which was launched by UN Habitat in November 2024, and also upcoming reviews of the new urban agenda and sustainable development goals held during HLPF and also the General Assembly in July 2026. It is essential steps to reaffirm housing not only as a human right, but also as a driver of climate action, social inclusion, and sustainable economies. And just a fun fact, ladies and gentlemen, in 2026, we'll be marking the 50th anniversary of Habitat 1, the first UN Habitat conference held in Vancouver in Canada. And under Canada's leadership, reminding us of the visionary spirit that first placed housing at the heart of sustainable development. The legacy of the Vancouver Declaration of 1976 continues to inspire our collective efforts to ensure that every person, everywhere, can live in dignity, in safe, affordable, and culturally appropriate housing, and in harmony with the environment. Let us all work together. With these words, I'd like to close and thank you very much for your attention. Thank you.
Thank you, Andre. It's an honor to have you with us, and thank you so much for your support and being here with us today. Next, we have Nikhil Seth, former executive director of UNITAR. Nikhil Seth is a longtime UN diplomat who was influential and helped steer the negotiations for the post-2015 development agenda. Nikhil.
Thank you, Yasemin. Distinguished the President of ECOSOC, Ambassador Thapa, Andre and Habitat. It's such a pleasure to be with all of you. And I've been in the multilateral system for over 4 decades. And you realize, as I've realized later in my career in multilateralism, the importance of sessions like this, which helps the interface between academia, governments, the private sector, and the UN system. There's nothing more productive than to get everyone on the same plate and to benefit from the riches they bring to all these debates. So congratulations, Yasemin, on bringing all these communities together in this room. And it's also a special pleasure to see my colleagues of my years in the United Nations. I see them scattered through the room, and I warmly welcome you and everyone else to this very important discussion. My work in the United Nations since 1990 spanned the creation of many platforms around sustainable development, and my comments really draw from this experience. Rio+20 and its outcome document were the source of the 2030 agenda containing the Sustainable Development Goals. Goal 11, the goal you referred to, Andre, on making human settlements safe, resilient, and sustainable, was a transformative recognition that adequate housing is a social good and a cornerstone of dignity, of equity, and climate resilience. If my mind goes back to the negotiations of the Sustainable Development Goals, and I think of the relative ease with which Goal 11 was negotiated compared to some of the goals which were really problematic negotiation, it's clear to me that the ways in which cities develop reflect the values of leadership, the concern for inclusivity, and care for the most vulnerable residents. Do we create cities for the privileged, or do we focus on the most disadvantaged? Housing and the way issues around housing are approached is the key to how we treat our citizens, especially those who live in our megapolises and other cities. I remember a very famous mayor from Bogota telling us that what we do in terms of roads, in terms of BRT, in terms of public spaces, is a reflection of the values we attach to different people who reside in a city. And never forget that as mayors. We used to convene many of the forum of mayors as we were preparing for SDG 11, and this is something which always resonated with me. You referred to the new agenda which we adopted in Quito in 2016, which called for people-centered urban future, which promotes affordable housing, inclusive land use, and a right to the city for all. Building on these bedrock foundations, member states have since adopted UNGA and UN Habitat resolutions, and Andre, you mentioned some of them, to address homelessness and to develop guidelines for creating housing for all. Doha recently concluded, had a reference to that, and as you said, Baku in the future will also revisit some of these issues. A summary of all this political energy which has gone into helping urban design and democratizing so many aspects of urban living points to the fact that the normative scaffolding that we have around urban development is extremely strong. And there's no dearth of good intention as reflected in these political outcomes, political documents. Many of them agreed to at the levels of presidents and prime ministers and kings and queens. So it's there. The political will as manifest in these outcome documents is there. But the real work lies in transforming these political statements into working for all, in our cities, in our communities, in our construction sites. How do we convert these political tailwinds into real action? every election and every election cycle brings promises for the urban agenda. And we've seen that very recently in the more celebrated elections, including in New York City. These global agreements are not only a call for action, but also a reminder that adequate housing is inseparable from other goals, like sustainable infrastructure, SDG 9 in particular. When we think of designing for 7 generations, we must also think of the other lifelines of energy, of water, of transport, and of digital access that makes houses into homes. The global housing crisis, as you mentioned, has reached alarming proportions. More than 1 billion people have no or inadequate housing. Millions have had their homes destroyed in wars, in conflicts, or natural disasters. And if we are to provide adequate housing, sustainable housing, for 9 billion people by mid-century without tipping the ecological balance, we must dramatically rethink urban planning, urban design, and habitation. The confluence of climate change and inequality is pushing us more urgently to do this fundamental rethink. Yet, there are encouraging signs. In Rwanda, community cooperatives are building low-cost, climate-resilient homes from compressed earth blocks, cutting emissions while creating local employment. In Chile, Alejandro Aravena's half-a-house model empowers families to expand affordable starter homes sustainably over time. These examples prove that the dignity and foresight can coexist within affordability. And that's the direction which we have to move. Twin foresight, dignity, and affordability. Infusing the concept of 7 generations, which Yasemin, you and your colleagues have injected into our discussions today, blends both philosophy and practicality. Everything what we do must draw from indigenous and traditional knowledge. We need to blend foresight, intergenerational equity, and stewardship of our planet into our decisions today. We must break free from the curve of short political cycles and market pressures and ask instead, what will be best for our great-grandchildren and for their great-grandchildren? Because the year you mentioned, 2200, 7 generations will take us deep into foresight for the future. To reach that goal, we must bridge the worlds of scientific and technological innovation with traditional and indigenous wisdom. Modern tools, green materials, modular systems, AI-enabled design can deliver efficiency and speed. Yet, indigenous and local traditions teach us how to live in balance with our surroundings. When these worlds meet, we create dwellings that breathe with the land, that cool naturally, that nurture community, and that endure. In India's Ladakh region, architects combine ancient rammed earth techniques with solar orientation to construct schools that stay warm in winter without heating. This is a vivid example of science and tradition meeting to serve generations yet to come. Singapore, one of our co-organizers, is another inspiring model which has shown how water management, urban greenery, affordable housing, and climate adaptation can coexist, proving that density and sustainability can thrive together. But education and policy and partnerships is what I want to talk about next, and the fact that achieving this vision depends on education, on policy, and partnerships. I spent 10 years of my UN life as the head of the UN Institute of Training and Research. And, in this field of capacity building and training, you know exactly when the penny drops in your audience, when they have captured the thoughts that you wanted really to communicate. And in this complexity of thinking through sustainable housing for 7 generations, I think depends crucially on the partnerships on education and policy. Universities and design schools must prepare architects and planners to see housing as both a technical and ethical mission. Governments should embed sustainability into building codes and finance systems that make green housing affordable. Public-private community partnerships must be the engines that turn good ideas into lived realities. The agreements of the past decade, from the 2030 Agenda to the New Urban Agenda, from the homelessness resolution of the UN Habitat Working Group that you mentioned, from what happened in Doha and what is going to happen in Baku, we have the scaffolding and the moral compass. But blueprints do not house people. Action does. Let us transform these frameworks into resilient neighborhoods, homes that resist floods, that harvest energy, that grow food, that shelter the vulnerable, and that foster human connection. Designing for 7 generations is not a poetic metaphor. It is an act of justice. It is the architecture of hope. If we can multiply such examples across cities and villages, from Singapore's green towers to Rwanda's earth homes to Ladakh's heating for schools and for Copenhagen's energy-positive dwellings, we will not only meet SDG 11 but redefine what home means for humanity. Let this conference that you have organized, so relevant and so topical around this wonderful theme, ignite a new chapter, a chapter where sustainability is not in years but in generations, where housing is treated not as a commodity but as a covenant with the future. Thank you, and I look forward to your discussions.
Thank you, Nikhil. And I love what you said about being stewards for our planet and communities for the future. Such an important point. Next we have with us His Excellency H.E.Lok Bahadur Thapa, President of ECOSOC, and he was nominated President of ECOSOC in 2025, and he's a permanent representative of Nepal to United Nations.
Thank you. Excellencies, distinguished delegates, dear colleagues, ladies and gentlemen. First of all, I'm really delighted to join you all at this very important meeting. I truly appreciate all the co-hosts and co-organizers for the timely focus on and the discussion on the sustainable housing. As we know that safe and affordable housing is a key target of the Sustainable Development Goal 11 on sustainable cities and communities. This year's SDG Progress Report, however, warns that the housing affordability crisis affects up to 3 billion people worldwide, over 1/3 of the global population. According to the UN Habitat, this statistics includes not only lack of access to adequate housing, but also to secure land tenure and essential water and sanitation services. Close to 1.1 billion people are living in slums or informal settlements, and 300 million are completely homeless. As per the 2024 UN Habitat Annual Report again, to meet global housing needs by 2030, 96,000 new housing units must be built every day. That is equivalent to 1 home every second. With growing populations, rapid urbanizations, and climate change intensifying vulnerabilities, addressing the issue of sustainable housing is critical to ensure no one is left behind in our pursuit of the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. Excellencies, colleagues, only 2 weeks back, our leaders adopted the Doha political declarations, renewing their commitment to the 1995 Copenhagen declarations and 2030 agenda. The Doha political declarations underscores the right to an adequate standard of living, including adequate, safe, accessible, and affordable housing, and calls for inclusive, sustainable urban development. It also highlights the need for genuine solidarity, effective multilateralism, and inclusive international cooperation to address today's urgent and complex challenges. Sustainable housing is a multidimensional issue that requires coordinated actions across sectors and stakeholders. Educators, practitioners, and institutions can bring valuable perspectives and solutions. Dear colleagues, as we build sustainable homes and communities, let us be guided by the wisdom of designing for 7th generation, that principle rooted in indigenous traditions that remind us to act with care for those who will inherit the world we shape today. I think it calls us to look beyond the lifespan of a building or a policy cycle, to imagine the child born a century from now and ask, will this choice safeguard their right to a safe, healthy, and dignified home? By weaving traditional and indigenous knowledge together with modern innovations, we can create housing that endures, homes that honor the land, strengthen communities, and reflect our shared responsibilities to future generations. Excellency, dear colleagues, both SDG 11 on sustainable cities and communities and SDG 9 on industry, innovation, and infrastructure will be reviewed in depth at the 2026 High-Level Political Forum on Sustainable Development to be convened under the auspices of ECOSOC. I believe your deliberation today will be important contribution to those discussions. I also encourage you all to engage with the work of the Economic and Social Council and its system. Through its various segments, forums, and meetings, including the United Nations Permanent Forum on Indigenous Issues, ECOSOC remains committed to engaging diverse stakeholders to more effectively address sustainable development challenges and opportunities. I look forward to your discussions and to the ideas that will emerge from this dialogue on sustainable housing, ideas that honor the wisdom of the past while building hope for the generations to come. I thank you.
Thank you, Your Excellency. And, thank you for enabling this event through ECOSOC and opening your home, ECOSOC chamber, to us also. It means a lot to us. Thank you. And finally, we have Jesse Lazar, my colleague from AIA New York. And Jesse is the executive director and leads AIA New York, the Center for Architecture, following a long tenure overseeing the organization's development and programs. Jesse.
Well, good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for being here today. As Yasemin said, I'm Jesse Lazar, Executive Director of AIA New York and the Center for Architecture. AIA New York is the largest and oldest chapter of the American Institute of Architects, representing 5,000 architects and design professionals here in New York, several of whom I see here today. It's an honor to welcome you to this gathering of thought leaders dedicated to shaping resilient, sustainable cities. For more than a decade, the Consortium for Sustainable Urbanization has brought together a committed community to deepen our understanding of how resilient design can shape the future of our urban environments, and today's convening carries that mission forward. I'm proud to represent the AIA New York chapter as we continue our long-time collaboration with the Consortium in this vital work. At AIA New York, we've long recognized and advocated for the essential role that architects, designers, and urban planners play in shaping our cities and thus our collective future. Our aim is to cultivate an open, adept, and future-forward architectural community in New York City. We empower our members to work at the apex of their abilities through critical exchange, access to professional resources, and advocacy on issues that advance positive change. I hope you'll forgive me for speaking for a moment about a subject intimately connected to our housing advocacy, but not housing itself. AIA New York has been a leading voice in addressing the housing crisis here in the city, including by its recent advocacy for the City of Yes for Housing Opportunity reforms in the city. But we work across multiple overlapping urban issues. One of the most pressing of those we face is decarbonization, which becomes even more salient as we explore novel approaches to increasing the production of new housing. The challenge of decarbonization goes beyond energy-efficient buildings to encompass the very materials we use to build them. Over the past year, AI New York has been developing a comprehensive strategy to address this critical issue. With the support of our partners, including the National Resources Defense Council, the Carbon Leadership Forum, and our own Committee on the Environment, which CSU President Yasemin Kologlu is chair of, AI New York has advanced 3 key pieces of legislation now in front of the New York State Legislature. These bills aim to incentivize low-carbon construction materials, codify the embodied carbon component of existing Executive Order 23, and establish pathways in the building code for reducing embodied carbon through reuse, low-carbon materials, and whole building life cycle assessments. These technical adjustments are a reflection of the long-term vision needed to transform our built environment. We're proud to be taking bold action on the policy front, but we recognize that this is just one piece of the puzzle. We must also continue working to advance policies that reduce emissions across the life cycle of our buildings, from production and construction to use, maintenance, and end-of-life circularity. As New York City works to meet its ambitious climate goals, particularly as we face challenges with energy affordability, waste capacity, and air quality, the window to act is narrowing. But together, we have an opportunity to not just meet these challenges, but to lead the world in sustainable urbanization. We know that we can solve multiple interlocking crises together, tackling decarbonization and housing scarcity with one sustainable urbanist united agenda. AI New York is proud to partner with the Consortium on Sustainable Urbanization to advance that critical goal. The affordability agenda that we're seeing drive politics right now, and that Director Seth referred to, we're very happy to see that this is happening. We're happy that leaders are beginning to respond to our need for adequate housing. At the same time, affordability politics is creating new pressures on existing sustainability and resilience initiatives, which we are already seeing play out at the state level here in New York. We must be able to do both things, which is why I'm so pleased that the consortium has brought us together under this banner today. Thank you again for being part of today's conversation. I look forward to the discussions and most of all the collaborations that will come from today's learnings. And I am confident that our collective work will help accelerate the transition toward more sustainable and resilient cities and a more equitable future. Thank you.
Thank you, Jesse, and thank you for telling the audience all the things that we're plotting together. And Jesse has been a big support for me and the rest of the architecture and design community, as well as for CSU and UN's goals and UN SDGs as well. So thank you for your support. All right, we're done with our remarks. And what an amazing group of individuals here giving us remarks today. Thank you so much for your support today. Thank you for enabling it. Now we're going to go to 2 panels. We're going to start with our first panel on the future of housing design, scientific and traditional and indigenous knowledge. Thank you so much. Please let's give them an applause.